Well, howdy YouTube family, it is Bolt CRNA coming to you again with another week's topic. So today, this week, we're going to be talking about the notice you turn in when you are leaving a job, or pretty much if you want to transition from one job, from one practice to another, how long does it take to do that? And the fact that it's not 2 weeks. That is the typical amount that you think of as your notice when you want to leave a job and go somewhere else. It's much longer as a CRNA or provider in general, most places. So let's talk about that. So this is one of those things that you don't really know about until you get into practice or getting closer to being into practice, is you start realizing that your time committed to a certain medical group is pretty big commitment. If you're a full-time W-2 employee, usually they expect you to be very invested and part of their group, and that they can rely on you. And you really can't just hop from place to place to place, typically, as a CRNA or provider. When I'm talking about these topics, I really mean physicians, CRNAs, probably nurse practitioners as well. In general, when you think about providers, and I'll tell you why. Because as a provider, you have to be credentialed. This word, I'll explain it to you. Credentialing for a medical facility means that they go through a lot of paperwork and a lot of time. They have entire staff, clerical staff, whose job is to get your NPI number, which is like your National Provider Identifier number. This is the number that you're given through, I believe it's Medicare, Medicaid, that designates that this is your specific number, and it's also how you bill. It's how they bill for your services and get paid for your practice. So they get all these numbers, they go through and do licensure check. Every state that you've lived in or other places that you've had licenses in and places you've worked, they have to go through full extensive background checks. I don't even pretend to know all the processes of everything they're doing, but I know it takes months. One job it took 4 months, another job it took 3 months for me, another job it took about 3 months. That's about the average, is about 3, maybe 4 months. Very unusual for it to take less time than that. I would say 2 months is very short. So pretty much from the time that they decide they want you and you agree on a position and you say, hey, this is, we agree on all these terms, this is the contract, I'm signing it, etc. Then they're gonna ask you for a whole slew of information. If you've ever done travel nursing before, you probably kind of have a similar vibe to this, where you remember you take a position somewhere and they're like, okay, send me your ACLS and your BLS, and send me your nursing license for this state, and send me this information and some other assortment of things. So it's kind of like that, except it's a lot more. Your credentialing as a provider includes a lot more documentation, a lot more information, especially the longer you've been a provider, the more places you've worked, the more history you have, especially if there's ever been any kind of lawsuits brought against you, which is not abnormal as a provider, especially in certain specialties like anesthesia and OBGYNs and things like that. It's very common for patients to, bring up a lawsuit against you, whether it's fair or true, and whether it's even ruled out or whatever. It's not even something that's ruled that you did anything wrong. It's still on your record. So these kind of things all take time. Credentialing bodies that want you to come on board, they have to go through all that stuff. They have to figure out all the information behind it. Of course, if you've ever had any kind of legal problems or, any kind of anything on your record legally, that is going to go through a long, drawn-out process. And then after they do all this, bringing together all this information, even if you have a clean slate, like I have nothing in my history pretty much, and it still takes 3 to 4 months for me. So if you have more things going on back there, it can take a lot longer. And then after they assemble all this information and have everything checked out, and they have all your licensing information and your billing information, all that kind of stuff, then they will submit your application to the medical board for that facility, whether it be a surgical center or it's a hospital and it's a medical board for the hospital. And it's a group of people who govern over the medical professionals of that hospital. And typically these people only meet once a month, usually. Sometimes every 6 weeks or something. It seems like it can be very sporadic. It changes from place to place, but it's not frequently. They don't meet to approve new providers coming in all the time. It's more of a monthly type thing maybe. So you have to wait for these guys to have their next upcoming meeting. They're not going to bump their meeting around for your specific application. You'll just have to wait until they come in. Then they come in, and then they'll go through the stack of providers who have been pretty much waiting for a month or so to be approved, and they'll say approved, approved, not approved, whatever, because they're the final say in what providers they have come into their facility. So those guys are going to approve you, hopefully, and then once they approve you, there's still some lag time of all the processing and all the paperwork and everything to be approved, and then all of your information being in the systems for the computers and pharmacy and all that kind of stuff. And then you come in and you have to proctor. And so proctoring is usually when you're a new provider, kind of like orientation essentially. They're showing you around, and a lot of times there's rules. Proctoring, different hospitals have different types of rules, but certain places that I've worked have very specific rules of like they need to watch you do 5 intubations. They like with another provider watching you do it. They need to watch you do like 5 general surgery cases. They need to watch you do 2 pediatric cases. They need to watch you do 2 cardiac cases. So you have to schedule all of these cases to be proctored in, and so another provider's watching you do these cases, and then when you're done with all your proctoring, then you're set free essentially and said like, okay, now you're officially on our schedule working here, normally. So this can take quite a long time. It can be kind of a time-consuming process, and it's a slightly frustrating process because there's so many places along this months-long journey where you'll get phone calls from the clerical office and they're like, this looks out of date, or this needs an extra signature, or there's this triplicate form on the 56th page of this document that you forgot to sign. We need you to go back and redo the whole thing. And there's just a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on with it that can be very, very frustrating as a provider trying to just get on somewhere. I say all that to say that's why there's not really a 2-week notice thing as a CRNA. Because if you imagine it took you 4 months to come on board as a new employee and be usable and be actually on their schedule for them to use you to help out with their needs, if you give them 2 weeks, if you say, hey, I want to leave, and that's the first time they've heard about it, and they haven't had any chance to even recruit someone in, not even to mention how long the recruitment process as a provider can be, because providers, we don't just grow on trees. There's a lot less of us out there, especially CRNAs. And so it can be time consuming, can take months to even recruit one single CRNA to come on board to a practice, maybe much longer than that. And then from that point that you've actually recruited, then it's going to be months of them actually credentialing. So most organizations will either write it into a contract or expect you to just professionally uphold this expectation of about 3 or 4 months of a notice. So if you want to transition somewhere else, you want to move, you want to work for a different hospital system, you just want a different change of pace or something like that, you really, for the time you decide you want to do that, you really need to let them know because they typically do expect months in advance. And I've done 3, I've worked 4 places total, 3 of them full-time, and 1 of them was per diem. For per diem or locums contracts, that's different. That's a whole different thing. You're not committed to their group. They know you're temporarily there. They know you're not giving them any long-term commitments. They don't put you on the schedule and have you like taking up an FTE spot. I'm talking about when you're a full-time vested person in their group. Those are the positions that you really need to give long notices. So I think I've had 3 of those positions, and all 3 of those positions I gave at least 3 months of a notice that I would be leaving, and here's 3 months of my time. You have the next 3 months to try and locate somebody to replace me. And I even try to help a little bit, like use a little bit of my own networking abilities and say, hey, I know this person may be a good option, and refer some people in who could maybe take over for me. And I even offered to stay per diem on with each of these groups after I left full time to still help them a little bit with scheduling and any kind of needs that they may have. And that's not totally necessary, but you'll find a lot of people in the anesthesia world and probably in the other physician type world do the same thing, just out of professional courtesy, because we know the scheduling can be hard. We know call schedules can be hard. We know staffing ORs can be hard. So we're not trying to burn bridges and do people poorly who we've worked with before. You know, we want to keep good relationships, and that's kind of where that professional courtesy comes from. You want to keep good relationships, you want to treat people well, you want to leave people in good standings. So it's just different from when I was an RN, and I pretty much would be like, I don't want to work here anymore, here's my 2-week notice, I'm gone. And that's it. You don't worry about whether they could get somebody else to work for you. They'll pull another nurse from another unit or something. They'll find a way to make it work. But you can't really do that as a provider or as a CRNA. So that is how it's very different in the anesthesia world when you transition that role. You can't just jump from job to job to job when you want to. Well, all right, guys, that was my topic on leaving jobs, 2-week notices, and that kind of dynamic that a lot of people don't seem to know about. Hope that was helpful for you. Of course, if that makes you scared to have that kind of commitment to a group, then you can always do 1099 independent contractor work, where you do just say, hey, I'm only going to be available for the next 4 months for you, or you can say, hey, I may be available for a couple years for you, but I'm not guaranteeing you any certain days per week. And in those situations, you don't have to give long notices when you leave because you're not very committed, you're not benefited in their group. So that's a different equation. So you can always do that if you'd like. That is everything for this week. If you haven't hit that like button, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button for me. It really helps out the YouTube channel. And leave a comment down below if the 2-week notice thing seems like a deal breaker for you. If that's something that you really like about being an RN or pretty much any other job out there where they expect 2-week notices, is that a deal breaker to transition it into a CRNA world and suddenly it's like 3-month notices? Which it has its own complications with it when you're wanting to transition to a new role, but you need to wait 3 months to do so. And until next week, that's Bolt out.